Hang on. Hey dudes, what's up? I am Vanessa Kaiser, and I'll be doing this video lecture on this book, one of the concepts in this book, The Secret Language of Leadership. And I think that I decided that I was gonna do, hold up, Chapter 7, Leadership Presence, the Body Language of Leadership, 132. Give me a second. There it is. So, I'm just going to read this real quick. So it says here that Denning basically feels that there are a couple basics of leadership presence, and those are eye contact, posture, gestures, practicing speaking, how we say it, and this thing called charisma. I will argue that there are a few more things that make a good leader stand out from a mediocre or even bad leader. First up, physical appearance. Obviously, this ain't gonna cut it. And obviously, this is a much more professional attire than what I started off with. What did you think when I started the video with headphones, a hat, rocking out to my music, drinking a beer? Not the best way to show off your leadership skills. So the first thing that Denning talks about is eye contact. Now, I would argue, in fact, that before we even get to eye contact, we need to start with our outward physical appearance. How is the person dressed? How do they look? How do they present themselves? Obviously, showing up to a leadership class wearing a baseball cap and headphones and rocking out to my favorite band, even though it was a really cool shirt, is not the best way to show off your seriousness, your authority. So first and foremost, you want to start with looking respectable. You want to make sure that you're dressed nicely. Men, of course, want to wear business type clothing, nice shirts, jackets, but women, same thing. So even the tiniest details can throw a person off. It's a simple fact that people respond positively to those leaders who dress with respect for themselves. Now that we've covered the outward physical appearance, let's get to the actual physicality of good leaders. Let's check back with Denning, who argues that eye contact is very important. I do not disagree with this. There's something shady about people who can't make eye contact with you. So I won't argue with Denning's eye contact. He goes on to tell us to throw away our note cards, step away from the podium, and find one or two people in the audience to make contact with. This is an excellent suggestion. Certainly you want to make sure that when you are speaking, you know the material well enough to be able to talk to your audience, not just talk to them. You want to make sure that you're familiar enough with your material that you can step away from your note cards and your podium and actually interact with the audience. How many times have you sat in on a lecture or been to an event where this person speaking obviously didn't know their material and was focused only on their note card? So Denning tells us to throw away the note cards and step away from the podium and find one or two audience members to connect with, which is, it's always a good idea. Now, this is where my extensive training as an actor comes into play, because the next thing that we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about the way you hold yourself, your physicality, your body language. Now, I spent a great deal of time in school learning how to stand. It was so exciting. It was great. We would spend hours learning how to stand right. You think I'm kidding. I'm not. So I'd like to introduce you to Patsy Rodenberg. She is a leading authority on voice and movement and body language in the acting community. It's actually, this book in particular is one of the books that is required reading for our theater classes. It's The Actor Speaks, and it has an introduction by the actress Dame Judi Dench. Those of you who aren't familiar with her, you should become familiar with her. She's amazing. So Patsy talks about 3 different kinds of stances of standing, and I will briefly discuss each one of them, and then we'll talk about the one that we spent hours learning how to stand in, and it's one that I believe a lot of leaders learn to stand in. So the first one, and the most important one, is called centering. It's your center, or more often you'll hear it referred to as the neutral position. And this is where you stand with your feet parallel under your hips. Your energy is slightly forward on the balls of your feet. Your knees are unlocked but not too bent. Your spine is up but not rigid. Your shoulders are released. Your head is dropped but not too low. Your eyes stay facing the horizon. The weight of your head takes the upper body over so that you can flop over from the waist. You can shake your shoulders out. And you basically make sure that your spine is in alignment. Your hips jut a little bit backwards, and this allows your breathing to flow from your body. It allows your energy to flow. We also call this the ready position, because from this position, you also have your hands hanging down at your side, and you have this very powerful stance that you can go from any emotion, you can go from any gesture into. This is a state of readiness. Your body is ready to take you into the next gesture, the next emotion. So the other 2 stances that Patsy talks about, which you'll be able to recognize, are the denial position, which is also called first position. And this is generally seen as the shoulders scrunched in, head down. Usually your hands are clasped by your side. Your chest is collapsed into yourself. This is a position that screams a lack of confidence. You don't necessarily feel like you know what you're doing or saying. It also reeks of fear. So it's a very collapsed position. The energy from your chest goes down into your stomach, and people can't see your eyes. So this is called denial. The next position that we talk about is called the bluff position. This is also called third position. Now this is where you stand with your shoulders back, your chest up and out. It's a defensive posture. Your chin is up, your eyes are up towards. This is also a fighting stance. You're ready to fight. It's an aggressive posture. The energy is up here somewhere. You're not really open to talking to anybody. You're right. You're correct. It's a very aggressive posture. So this is called bluff. This is third position. So you want to find yourself back in center or in neutral, which is, again, your shoulders relaxed, your chest is straight, your chin is parallel with the floor, your eyes find the horizon in front of you, everything is relaxed, and you're in a neutral, ready position. And this is a position that speaks of strength and of openness. I'm ready to listen to you. I'm ready to hear what you have to say. So pay attention to the way that you see politicians and leaders speaking, because the more you pay attention, the more you're going to understand what works for you and what doesn't work for you, what makes a good leader and what doesn't make a good leader. And it's these tiny little things that we look for, like the way somebody holds their shoulders or the way somebody holds their chin, whether or not they make eye contact with you or not. These are the things that we look for before they even open their mouth. This is what we're looking for in what makes a strong leader versus what makes a mediocre leader. So now that we've talked about the physicality, the outward appearance, and some of the way that we stand, the way that we hold ourselves, let's talk about voice. Denning briefly talks about this on 138, paragraphs 2 and 3, and I really love what he says here. I'm just gonna read it aloud. When leaders have a firm conviction in their minds, their stories become holistic. When they re-experience and retell the story, they become the story. They are at one with the audience, with themselves, and with their message. Their voice expresses, their demeanor expresses, the way they hold their body expresses. Their tone of voice expresses. The look in their eyes expresses. In this way, leaders communicate their true nature in the simplest, most direct way as one living being to another. Performance is a matter of bringing into harmony body, emotion, and thoughts. It draws on all elements, on their bodies like athletes and dancers, on their feelings like singers and lovers, and on their minds like mathematicians and thinkers. I'm a little disappointed that he doesn't bring up actors in this. I think actors get a bad rap. Most people think that acting is pretending, that acting is just a performance. And the way that we're taught is that acting is truth. You are telling a story. You are telling a truthful story. You have to believe it's true. When you go to the movies and you watch these actors, you don't want to see somebody just reading lines. You don't want to see somebody giving a flat performance. You want to believe that Daniel Radcliffe is Harry Potter. You want to believe that, I don't know, what's the last movie that you saw? Think of whatever actor it is. You want to believe that they're playing that character. And in order to do that, they have to be truthful to themselves. They have to embody all of that character's nuances and beliefs and stories. And they have to tell those stories as those characters. And if they can't convince you, they haven't done their job. Well, it's the same thing with leaders. When you're telling a story, we've talked about this narrative intelligence in detail, and I believe this ties directly to your physical appearance and the way that you hold yourself as a leader. If you stand up there and tell a story in a flat, monotone voice, first of all, nobody's going to be listening to you. Second of all, nobody's going to care. They're not going to have anything to do with you at that point. They'll be falling asleep. So you want to make sure that when you retell these stories, you are there in the moment. You are in the moment of the story and creating this for them. One of the reasons why Shakespeare continues to be so popular these days is because he uses words to create pictures. He doesn't just write lines that actors say. The actors use his words to create pictures. And that's what good leaders have to do. They have to use their words and their stories to create pictures, to let the audience live it with them. And in order to do that, they need to be able to train their voice, to modulate their voice into being expressive. And movie stars do that, and politicians do that. I found this absolutely fascinating article by the Washington Post, which I will link to in the comment section below, called "Speaking of Science, the Vocal Tricks Political Candidates Use to Sound Like Leaders." And so this scientist did this study on politicians' voices. And the author was interested in what he calls, I'm going to read from the article, the charismatic voice, the vocal stylings that politicians use to project leadership characteristics like emotion, vision, and dominance. So they researched and analyzed 3 speech samples from each politician, and those politicians are listed in the article, and they extracted while they were doing speeches, and they extracted every vowel of the speeches and calculated the loudness and vocal pitch of each speaker. Even though each politician has a distinctive voice, they shared a charismatic strategy during speeches to diverse audiences. They spoke using diverse pitches and intensities. Another interesting thing from this article, which I found fascinating, is he goes on to say the candidates shared strategies when they spoke to an audience of fellow leaders as well. During speeches at the United Nations, the New Hampshire Republican Leadership Summit, and on the floor of the U.S. Senate, the politicians changed things up. Rather than speak with a wide vocal range, every politician kept their voices within a relatively narrow range when addressing other leaders. That's absolutely fascinating. So So when you're speaking to people that you want to capture their attention, you're going to modulate your voice. You're going to use expressions in order to catch their attention and keep them with you and keep them interested. But when you already have an audience and they already know you, there's absolutely no need to use expressions and emotions because they're going to listen to you no matter what you say. So you don't have to put as much effort into it because you have, as what we like to call a captive audience, a trapped audience. They're not going anywhere. So they're going to listen to you no matter what you have to say. So you're just going to say it. Finally, one of the last things that Dunning talks about is practice, practice, practice. So practicing all of these things that we've talked about, practicing dressing right, making eye contact, which for some people is really hard. I'm always surprised when I take acting classes. We actually do a lot of exercises where we practice making eye contact with each other because it is a very vulnerable state. It's a very vulnerable position to do. You've heard the expression, your eyes are the windows to your soul. And certainly when you're making eye contact with somebody, you're opening yourself up to them. You're making yourself vulnerable to them. And so in acting class, we do a great deal of exercises where we do nothing but stare into each other's eyes so that you become more comfortable with opening yourself up and exposing yourself. And it does take a lot of trust. And when you have somebody who's willing to stand up there and to make eye contact with complete strangers, you do almost immediately feel a sense of trust, a connection with them. And then of course he talks about, you know, throwing away your notes, stepping out from behind the podium. Well, anybody who has taken public speaking, the first one, 1301 or 101 or whatever your course designation was, they talk about extemporaneous speaking. And this is a very good type of speaking, which basically means that you know what you're going to say, but you don't memorize it word for word. This gives you the ability to be able to improvise. One of the best things that you can do with making a speech, with giving a speech, is you know your topic well enough to be able to speak off the cuff, as it were, but also utilize those people around you in the audience so that when you make eye contact with somebody, perhaps you can notice something about them and bring it into your speech. The very last thing that Dunning talks about is charisma. This magical thing that, you know, every actor in Hollywood has or arguably doesn't have, which is charisma. He talks a lot about Gandhi. He talks a lot about Martin Luther King. What is charisma? Well, he defines it on page 139 by saying that charismatic leaders, it is said, appear so extraordinary due to their strategic insight, strong convictions, self-confidence, unconventional behavior, and dynamic energy that followers idolize them and want to become like them. Now he goes on to explain in the rest of the chapter to say that charisma basically can be taught. That if you take all of these things that we just talked about, your outward appearance, your gestures, your ability to make eye contact, your ability to modulate your voice, to put expressions in your voice, to believe your story, tell your story by recreating it. If you do all of these things, then by default, you're charismatic. All of that comes together to make a charismatic speaker and to make a good listener. So, in conclusion, in order to capture your audience and earn their respect and continued attention, strong leaders have to be aware of their presence, their outward physical appearance, their eye contact, posture and gestures, and their vocal modulations. All of these behaviors need to be practiced in order to come across as natural, making even the most ordinary persons extraordinary. Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing the rest of the video clips. Have a nice evening and a great week.